On This Week in Enterprise Tech, DDoS on DNS, an IT facepalm at a hospital, and we get all up in net neutrality with Evan Brown. Twiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 92, recorded May 19th, 2014. Net neutral, ISP hostile. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by TechServe, the world's largest independent Apple retailer and professional services provider. Go to techserve.com/twiet-7sins to get access to the free ebook on the 7 deadly sins of iPad deployment. And by RingCentral. The cloud-based phone system we use just got better with the launch of Meetings, the full-service video conference feature. Zero startup costs, and RingCentral starts at under $25 a month per user. Try it now with a 30-day risk-free trial and buy one desk phone and get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. Call 800-543-9980 or visit ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. And by LegalZoom. Visit LegalZoom.com to save on your legal needs and gain access to a network of legal plan attorneys for guidance. LegalZoom is not a law firm but provides self-help services at your specific direction. Visit LegalZoom.com and use offer code ENTERPRISE to receive $10 off at checkout. Welcome to Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balassier, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I'm joined by my fantastic cast of characters, starting with Mr. Brian Chi, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii, currently holding up a Fluke One Touch. What you doing there, Brian?
Fluke was so nice to send me one to play with. And what's really cool is it's got SFP ports on this sucker.
Oh, you get all the cool toys. Now, you're going to be using this probably in the underwater observatory, right?
Well, it'll be used in a bunch of different places to get used to it. Unfortunately, I got to give it back when I'm done.
Unless it gets stolen. You know, Leo will be stopping by Hawaii in a bit, you know, so if you wanted to leave it out.
Yes, and I understand Leo likes single malt.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's, moving away from grand theft larceny, let's move over to, well, our other host is coming to us, I believe, from The Matrix, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, what is that, and where are you, and what's new in your life?
Well, Padre, I'm still in the swamp, but I've got a little device called a WebAround sitting behind me. There's going to be a video on it for next time, but this is a great little thing. It slips on the back of your chair. If you are doing video conferencing or things like Twiet, it allows you to hide all the clutter behind you in your office. It's a great thing made here in the U.S. by some people who are genuinely going after the small business, the medium business, and doing it on a startup. I'm real happy to have met them, real happy to mention the product, and real happy to be coming to you from the Swampy Matrix this week.
Now, who among us does not like covering up our clutter? But instead of doing that, let's get right to the blip. The first blip today comes to us from The Atlantic. It's all about Woz to the rescue. That's right. Over the weekend, in an impassioned missive to the FCC that was part plea and part soul-bearing, nostalgia-having, government corruption-exposing, special interest-slapping rant, Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak explained why the FCC was on the wrong side of the net neutrality issue. At the core of Woz's open letter is whether the FCC will represent the powers of the wealthy or the desires of the vast majority of the citizens it was tasked to represent. On a personal note, you go, Woz.
Keeping things in the Apple-centric universe, I want to turn to Apple, which seems to have gotten off the lawsuit train for at least a while. Word has come that they've settled their long-running patent disputes with Motorola, and on the heels of that, news is coming out of South Korea that they have begun talks about an out-of-court settlement with Samsung. Now, there's no guarantee, and frankly, most companies wouldn't be involved in this from either a plaintiff or a defender standpoint, but where it does become important is that this could signal a point at which Apple is ready to turn away from a reliance on lawsuits and get back to the business of innovation. And frankly, that's good for all of us.
I'm going to come to you about science fiction today. Researchers have figured out how to make matter from pure light. Back in 1934, a team of physicists came up with an idea for how one might create matter from light. Put simply, just slam two photons into each other and get an electron and a positron, the basic building blocks of matter. Now, 80 years later, a team has a plan to carry out the experiment in real life. In a paper just published in Nature Photonics, Professor Steve Rose and a company from the Imperial College of London have devised a two-step process to turn light into matter. He says, we have shown in principle how you can create matter from light. So while this is a long way from being the replicator of Star Trek lore, it is a first step in proving that the physics is real.
Fantastic. Now, when we come back, we're going to be jumping into some Enterprise Bites, and then we've got a special guest, Evan Brown, coming back to us, Internet Cases from This Week in Law, to run over some of the issues around the FCC's controversial net neutrality plan. But before we do that, let's take just a moment to thank the first sponsor of the Twilight Riot, TechServe. Now, we're seeing some amazing business solutions being deployed on the iPad today. Businesses keep coming up with creative ways to service their customers, to increase productivity among their employees, and to make more money with the same amount of investment. For example, the Institute of Culinary Education equipped students, faculties, and chefs with the iPad, empowering them to do away with heavy and unwieldy textbooks, streamlining the learning process. A major cable service provider in the Northeast gave its field technicians, who are the public face of the company, iPads that had been configured to provide better customer service to its customers. And retail companies have enhanced their in-store customer experience by using the iPad, not just as a point of sales device, but also as a spot where customers can learn about sales, special offers, and upcoming events. Now, these clients and more have turned to TechServe, the country's largest Apple reseller that sells, supports, and manages the largest iPad deployments in the world to manage their iPad projects. Now, if you're considering adding iPads to your business, why not ensure the project's success with an experienced partner? TechServe assists businesses of all sizes to deploy Apple solutions, as well as solutions from Avid, Adobe, and more throughout the United States. No matter if you've started deploying iPads or are just getting started, TechServe can help. Now, here's what we want the Twilight Riot to do. We want you to see if maybe TechServe is the partner that you need for your successful iPad deployment. Right now, TechServe is offering a complimentary download just for my listeners who are deploying iPads or who are interested in learning more about doing just so. Go to techserve.com/Twilight-7sins to get access to the 7 deadly sins of iPad deployment and see the common pitfalls that throw companies for a loop during their iPad projects. This complimentary download is available right now just for my listeners at tekserve.com/Twilight-7sins. And we thank TechServe for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get to it. The first Enterprise Bite is all about the sum of all fears. That's right, DDoS attacks on DNS servers are on the rise. We've covered this in the past. We've talked about how DNS servers, are those domain name services, are the weakest link of the internet. When you attack those, you basically do a denial of service attack on anyone who might be contacting those DNS servers in order to find their proper routing. Well, now we're finding out that more and more researchers are finding that these DNS servers are actually being attacked by non-NTP amplification attacks. Now, Point DNS is the registrar for more than 220,000 domains, and they were offline for hours just 2 weeks ago. That meant no email, no DNS updates, no nothing, no support. The attack was coming from non-spoofed, non-NTP sources, which is important because NTP attacks have become sort of the norm, the de rigueur. They're the flavor of the day, but this would sort of old school, take over a lot of computers with a botnet and point them at a DNS server, which is much more difficult to defend against. Now, 20 gigabits has become the new norm for attack, with 400 gigabit NTP attacks now quite common, but it's a little scary that the trolls of the internet have turned their attention towards the internet's weakest link. Cheever, let me throw this to you first. We've known for a while that any sort of sustained DOS or DDoS attack against a DNS server would be a bad thing. Why do you think it's been so difficult for us to switch to tech solutions that aren't as vulnerable?
I don't know. I keep asking the same question of people like Cricket and Wally and various other folks at Infoblocks and things like that, and I don't know. My best guess is that a lot of small and medium-sized corporations that are big enough to be running their own DNS don't want the recurring cost of getting these certificates really registered. If you are Joe Blow off the street, you're looking at anywhere from $300 to $700 to $1,200 a year for a certificate, depending upon how greedy the registry is. So that may be a contributing factor, and it might also be inertia.
Inertia. Actually, inertia is a really good point. Let's talk about that, Curtis. When we speak of inertia, especially in the enterprise, it's not a trivial thing. When you've got something that is working good enough, it's very difficult to convince your superiors, to convince your CTO or your CFO that they should invest millions of dollars in new gear that will solve a problem that has yet happened. Is this what it's going to take? Are we going to have to start seeing enterprises lose money before enough of their IT managers say, look, this is no longer an option. We need to invest in, say, secure DNS?
Padre, you're absolutely right. It is very difficult to convince a company that they should spend money to solve a theoretical problem. It's only when they begin seeing this become a real problem that they start taking it seriously. I mean, let's look at things like the very theoretical problem of POS attacks that weren't guarded against until Target turned it into a very real attack. I think what we're going to see is companies gradually start to look at protecting some of the infrastructure of their entire service portfolio, DNS being a big piece of that. But still, it's going to take a while because, let's face it, for most executives, especially when you get out of the IT hierarchy, DNS is one of those magical things. They don't know how it works. They don't know really why it works. And so for someone to come and say that we need to spend money on something that, for all they know, is a bunch of chicken bones being rattled in a cup and thrown on the ground, it's a tough sell until your competitor gets nailed. At that point, it becomes something you really have to pay attention to.
I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a couple of big profile fails. It's going to take a lot of enterprises getting out there and realizing, this is actually going to cost us money before they make the adjustment. And I think you're exactly right to compare it to the POS failure that we covered here on Twiat not too long ago. I remember it was Oliver who said, look, it's all about the money. As soon as it becomes financially painful enough for the enterprises to switch, then they'll switch. And sure enough, after Target, they switched. Let's move on to the second enterprise bite. This one is sort of an IT facepalm. A physician does his own IT work and costs his hospital $4.8 million. Now, this comes to us from Network World, talking about how in 2010, a doctor who was part of the New York Presbyterian and Columbian University Medical Center was trying to, quote-unquote, deauthorize a personal device that he had attached to the hospital's network. In doing so, the physician reconfigured the network, opening up a major security hole. The leak was only discovered after the hospital received a complaint from a person who found personal medical information about their deceased partner on the internet. Now, the leak cost New York Presbyterian a $3.3 million settlement, while Columbia will need to fork over $1.5 million. Chibert, let me throw this over to you. Especially working at a large environment like a university where there is a lot of personal information, along with a lot of information that needs to be private, this is like a nightmare scenario for you, right? I mean, this is worse than the network going down. This is something in the secret stash that becomes public.
Oh, I'm not allowed to talk about what happened, but UH has gone through this. It has been a problem. We've gotten to the point we're starting to call them spills. And a lot of it's because people are not paying attention. The checks and balances aren't in place, and the ramifications aren't there. You know, when you have someone that's a senior to the organization, like a senior faculty member or a physician, the tendency, the knee-jerk reaction is to kowtow to them and give them anything they want. Why a physician had enough rights to be able to go and make those kinds of changes to an Active Directory infrastructure is beyond me. And that is why these people deserve every last cent they got, because that should not have happened. The checks and balances didn't work, and the physician had way too much authority. When this kind of thing happens, you know, when you start doing day-to-day work as an administrator, or the administrator account is given out to too many people, this is the kind of stuff that happens.
Now, Chibert, I want to continue because you touched on something very, very important, which is there is a cultural thing here. There's a societal thing here, which is there are some people, no matter what field they may be in, that are considered above reproach. And so when they start poking around in areas that they shouldn't be in, very few people are willing to stick their neck out and say, hey, doctor, should you really be doing admin for the hospital's network? This is not an isolated incident. I mean, I've seen this happen more notably in the enterprise when an executive who maybe has absolutely no experience with IT says, no, I need to be able to use my iPad at work because otherwise my daughter won't be able to play games when she comes visit me. This is the sort of stuff that we've become used to, right? I mean, IT managers would kind of laugh about it, but this is kind of a reality.
No, it actually goes even further than this. It's the arrogance and entitlement. I own the freaking company. I should have the administrator password. You know, I'm sorry. I just went through this with a restaurant this last weekend. And the owner of the restaurant, you know, obviously is entitled to the administrator passwords, but because he didn't have the experience, he gave them out to a point-of-sale company that were, let's call a spade, idiots. And they went and started making changes to the firewall and managed to lock out just about everybody from their system. This attitude of entitlement that I'm entitled to the super user password, I'm entitled to make any changes I want, and you're going to fix it for me. The IT industry really and truly needs to go and slap them hard. I have a annoyance rate in my fee structure. And if someone goes and does something really, really stupid, they get the annoyance rate.
You know, Chibert, I understand you. Sometimes I wish that you would speak more of your mind, you know, what you really think, instead of couching it in all these kind and gentle slaps. That's all it took, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's go over to Curtis. Curtis, this is an interesting case because it's, again, you know, it's not just a cultural thing. There is a big issue here of BYOD in the enterprise. We have a little bit of information about this, but we have no idea why, first of all, the doctor had a personal device attached to a network at a hospital that had access to sensitive information. I mean, that sounds like a huge HIPAA compliance fail. But also, then we don't know why the doctor had access to the network at all. He shouldn't have been able to authorize the device in the first place. This just smells of the necessity for policy training. You're muted.
Well, it certainly does bring up the need for policy training, no question about that. You know, there are things, as you say, we don't know. This could have been a device that was attached to the network any number of years ago, before handheld devices were popular or were common, and it just continued on for a long time. I've seen that in a number of healthcare areas where a physician who's on the leading edge wants to do something like that, and typically a healthcare organization will work with them to try to make that true. But we really have two levels of issue here. One is the BYOD side, the attaching a personal device to the network. We have all sorts of tools to handle that now. The other side, and this is the more serious one, is that someone gave this guy admin privileges on the network. How that happened is the bigger question, because I'm sorry, I don't care if he's the best neurosurgeon in the world. It doesn't mean that he's a competent network administrator, as we just saw. You know, in a lot of places, there's the tendency to give anyone with MD after their name an awful lot of respect that goes way beyond their competency as a medical professional. Yes, they put in a lot of time. Yes, they've had to memorize a great deal, but their knowledge tends to be specialized. we should, as an organization, as a society, accept that and use that as the basis for dealing with them when they come to us with unusual demands, rather than simply saying that someone who has a doctorate somehow has knowledge across a wide variety of fields. It just doesn't tend to be the case.
We've got a really good comment here in the chat room from Dudes Fried. He says, hey, well, guys, guess what? IT is a service industry, and you got to do what the guy who signs the checks wants, and you have to just deal with the consequences. Sorry, but that's how that works. In principle, I agree with you, but here's the thing. That philosophy came from the early days of IT, when the IT guy just happened to be the employee who had the most technical knowledge. I mean, those of us who are old enough remember a time when computers were just starting to come into the office, where networks were just starting to become an option, not a necessity. And, oh, the guy in accounting, he also knows about computers, so suddenly he's in charge of IT. We've moved beyond that. I don't think IT is just a service industry anymore. We especially here at Twyat, talking to IT people, understand that with these decisions, now that they have such awesome consequences for data security, for customer privacy, you have to be more than just the fast order cook on the IT line. You have to actually be able to have your input into the company to say, look, if we don't do this, and this, the company will cease to exist. Cheebert, I'd like to get your view on this, because what Dudes Fried has said is something that I hear a lot, which is, look, I just do what the guy who signs my checks tells me to do. Do IT people have a bigger responsibility than just saying, okay, well, this is going to cause the company to fail ultimately, but you told me to do it, so I'm going to do it?
Actually, my opinion is that that is an old and ancient attitude. It's no longer just service, especially when you're starting to deal with regulatory issues. It's not the surgeon that's going to get slapped. It's going to be the IT professionals that are going to get slapped, and it's their department that's going to have to pay the fines. Keep in mind, as much as these physicians are well trained, there is so much specialization, and the IT infrastructure to comply with regulatory issues is so complex that the doctor, the physicians, the faculty need to give you the respect to do your job correctly if they are expecting of you to pass the regulatory audits.
Right. I want to give the last word to you, Curtis, before we move away from the enterprise bytes. This smells of that tipping point where IT workers move from just service workers to people who should have input into the higher levels of strategic planning. Do you think from the enterprise side that people understand that at some point they have to start listening to those who have the technical expertise to protect their endeavor, their company, from the threats that exist on a networked system?
Padre, yes, I do. And the good news is that the industry seems to be going in that direction. One of the things that we've written about a lot over the last couple of years is the increasing acceptance of the IT people in these strategic discussions, and the acknowledgement that if you want IT to keep up with this fast-moving strategic business world that we're in, they have to be part of the conversation. That's the good news. Now, from the IT perspective, it's a dual-edged sword, because on the one hand, it means that you are getting input on these strategic decisions, and you are getting advance notice about things that are changing. The downside, perhaps, is that now it's incumbent upon the IT group to learn the language of the other business units. So IT people are now having to learn how to converse with people in finance, in marketing, and in sales so that they can contribute to these strategic decisions. It means a more well-rounded IT professional, someone who has a lot more career potential, but it also means spending some real time learning how the other folks think.
Well, gentlemen, now that we've got our chat room riled up, it's kind of fun watching them right now. They're really angry at each other. I think now is a good time to break and talk about the second sponsor of the Twyat Riot, Ring Central. Now, when Leo decided to build the brick house, he thought that we should dog food. We should do all the things that we had been telling our listeners, our loyal audience to do, which is move into the cloud. That's why our messaging is in the cloud. Our mail is in the cloud. That's why we share our appointments in the cloud. So when our IT guy, Russell, came to us and told us that we could have a full-featured phone system without a big bulky box in the basement, well, it was a no-brainer. We love RingCentral. Zero startup costs, no PBX hardware to install or maintain. And now RingCentral has launched meetings. So in addition to all that we love about RingCentral, receiving voicemails through our emails, sending and receiving fax messages from our smartphones, the auto receptionist who greets our callers and announces employees and department extensions. Now with meetings, we can host face-to-face meetings in high definition and share desktop or documents with anyone, anytime, anywhere, on any device. Meetings makes RingCentral the single best business solution on the market today. Well, right now, RingCentral is offering all-inclusive pricing under $25 per month per user. You can start now with a 30-day risk-free trial, and they have a special offer for my listeners. When you buy one desk phone, you get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. So call this number, designated for my listeners, 800-543-9980. That's 800-543-9980. One more time, 800-543-9980. Or you can go to ringcentral.com and use the promo code TWIT. That's ringcentral.com, promo code TWIT. And we thank RingCentral for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. We welcome back to the show special guest, our legal guru, Mr. Evan Brown. Evan, thank you for coming back to Twiat.
Padre, it's always great to be here. Really looking forward to this conversation. I've had fun listening to you guys talking about these issues you brought up so far. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Now, it's not too long ago, just 3 weeks ago, that we had you on the show. And since then, something, of course, big has happened. I know you covered it last Friday on Twill. And actually, it was a contentious episode, which I love. We had something planned for today, but we thought with everything that's going on with the FCC, and since it has such a huge impact on the enterprise that runs on the internet, we needed to bring in a legal expert to actually talk about, well, what's going on. So let's break it down. What we know so far is that last week, on the 15th, the FCC, in a 3-2 split decision, split along party lines, might I add, including FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler, voted to push forward with their notice of proposed rulemaking. Now, this doesn't mean that their net neutrality plan is now their policy, but it does mean that they've opened the proposal to public comment until September 10th, 2014, which is actually an extended deadline. It also means that they've asked for public comments on the usage of Title II, whether or not ISP should be regulated as a common carrier or telecommunication services, rather than information services as they currently enjoy. Now, I want to give this to you first, Evan, because everyone just take a cleansing breath. Because I know we're all a little bit heated. We're all a little upset. We're all a little bit jaded by what we think the FCC is doing. In fact, I may have compared the FCC to some sort of lady of the evening. But let's back, you know, just sort of dial that down a little bit and get reasonable and give the FCC their say. Evan, first, let's talk about this notice of proposed rulemaking, the NPRM. Exactly what does that mean, and where does that fall along the way to turning this proposal into their actual policy?
That's a great question, Padre, and I'm so glad you asked, because it clearly is one of those things that we tend to look past pretty often. You know, what exactly is going on here? This is the government. It's so complex. Is this the law? Is it not the law? What, you know, is it binding and what have you? So I think it is useful, at least very briefly, to sort of zoom out here and examine what's going on. Remember, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is an independent agency. I mean, it's part of the federal government, and administrative law in general serves a couple of purposes. One, there's a lot of stuff that the federal government has to handle. And the other purpose of having agencies be in charge of all this stuff is that presumably, ostensibly, you get experts who know about the industry that the agency is tasked with regulating here. Since the early to mid part of the 20th century, the federal government, since after the Great Depression and the New Deal, since that time, the federal government has been way up in our business a lot more. So there's this structure in place called the Administrative Procedure Act that Congress passed in 1946, and that lays the basic ground rules for the agencies who are tasked with handling the more minute details of the way the federal government regulates our lives. The Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, sets forth those ground rules, and one of the things that the APA does does is require agencies in many circumstances, when they're going to be implementing rules like the proposed open internet rules, to engage in this process where they give the public the opportunity to comment on those rules. It's sort of an antiquated source, in as much as it's been around for a long time, of crowdsourcing, an antiquated version, an older version, a lot more longer standing version of crowdsourcing. We live in a democracy, so we ought to have the input of a lot of people. So what we have here, the rules haven't been enacted yet, and it's Chairman Wheeler's objective to get some rules on the books by the end of the year. But where we are here is, of course, it was a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that we heard that the FCC was going to be throwing on the table some new rules to address the void left from the Verizon versus FCC decision from January of this year. So we just got this indication that they were coming. Now there's officially a notice of proposed rulemaking, an NPRM, which is required by federal law to be out there. There's this, as you mentioned, Padre, an extended comment period. Usually it's about 30 days or so. Here we have all the way until September for people to formally submit comments. And it's a very lengthy document. The proposed rules are actually only about 2 pages, but there's essentially around 100 pages or so of information that the FCC is providing with it, explaining sort of the policy reasons, and most importantly, asking questions, saying, hey, we would really like comments on these particular issues. So let us know what you think. So that's the process and the procedure now. And, again, going back to the end of the year, between now and then, the commission may very well vote on some final rules after this extended comment period.
Now, Evan, let me ask you this. I mean, they're asking for comments, again, in this sort of older crowdsourcing method, but they've already received a huge outcry from the public. They received an open letter from some of the major companies on the internet, including Microsoft and Google and Yahoo and Apple. It almost feels like show theater now that they're saying, oh, okay, well, what are your comments? Haven't they heard people's comments already? And why would they push forward with this call for comments, with this NPRM, if it seems as if the public's already firmly against it?
Well, I'm not sure what would be a good alternative. Some people are upset about it. Some others think that Padre, you and I have talked more than once before how network neutrality, the question of the open internet, is such a polarizing issue. Sure, we know people are upset about it and people feel strongly one way or the other. So what's the FCC to do now? Just shut everything down and go incommunicado to implement these rules? No, the NPRM is built into the framework for how administrative law works, how agencies have to do things. So it's required that it issue this NPRM, and it's much to our benefit, whether you like what the FCC is thinking about doing, or certainly whether you dislike what it's ultimately going to do. It's much to our benefit to have this very detailed information as to what the FCC is thinking and the particular issues that it actually wants to seek comment for. We're better off having this out there and for us to discuss than what we are just blog posts from Chairman Wheeler and then commentators flying off the handle on either end. This is a much more formalized, systematic method for doing it, and it's how it ought to be done, whether you like how it ends up or not.
Right. One last question before we move on to the next part of this this discussion, and that is, there is an interesting subplot here in the split decision. So the 2 Democrats plus Wheeler, also a Democrat appointee, voted for the plan, while the 2 Republicans voted against it, which seems to be a huge flip-flop from just a couple of years ago when you had people like Senator Ted Stevens who wanted to kill anything that had net neutrality or open internet connected to it. Again, this seems to be a big disconnect between a party that ran on the policy of protecting the internet, of creating a free internet, and this plan. What's going on?
We've come a long way, and I guess now some people have figured out that the internet is more than a series of tubes, referring back to Ted Stevens a few years ago before his, I won't say it was untimely death. He was an old guy when he got killed in a plane crash, but But, we know more now than what we did then. And I think probably most importantly, we have guidance from the federal circuit, the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals, having given its decision in January of this year, in large part eviscerating, not completely, but in large part eviscerating the 2010 open internet order that the FCC had promulgated, which actually talked about unlawful discrimination against bits and what have you. So if you read the dissenting opinions, and if you go to the FCC website, it's worth a read. If you go to the end or toward the end, you actually can read the dissenting opinions from Commissioners Pai and O'Reilly, and they're pretty well articulated what their objections are to wanting to do this rulemaking the way it is now. I mean, clearly there's some fluff in there talking about, it's a bipartisan consensus that we want to have a free and open internet. So they stick with the platform that the FCC presumably is on. They don't want to portray the FCC as being, out and out against an open internet. But the big objection, the thread that you see in the two dissenting opinions, or the two dissenting statements is more accurate to say it that way, is that this is really Congress's job. And moreover, because the reason that they believe it's Congress's job now is because with the guidance that we got from the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals in January, shows that we don't really have a clear legal roadmap forward for regulating an open internet in this way, whether it be under Section 706 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which by shorthand we say treating them as information services, versus if the FCC were to reclassify broadband providers as telecommunications services under Title II. The dissenting statements seem to say, well, it's going to be folly to do this again. We've gotten shot down twice at the federal appellate level, so it's time to put this to Congress, and it's really not our job right now. And it's something that should be done in a more formal legislative manner, higher up in the food chain, if you will, when it comes to the way the federal government works, putting it in the hands of the legislature. And it's not really what the FCC should be doing right now. Apart from that, who on earth knows what's going on in their minds as politicians, which of course they are in large part here. So when it comes to speculating what's in their minds, probably no good use for doing that and what their political motivations might be.
Fantastic, Evan. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to get right back to you, but I want to bring Curtis and Chibert into the fray here. Going along with our theme of sort of backing off and giving the FCC just a couple minutes to explain, and just assuming that they're not evil men twirling their mustaches in a back room trying to screw over the American public, let's look at what the plan actually does say. And I think it hinges on the definition of net neutrality, or the open internet as they're calling it in their proposal, because we've never had a really good definition of what that means. Now, the FCC sees open internet or net neutrality as a level playing field where consumers are allowed to make their own choices about what they consume, what applications they use, what services they decide to join. Now, this includes the ability to access, create, and share content freely. This comes from the open internet guidelines that are posted on the FCC website. Now, they also say that a level playing field should protect free expression, promote competition, empower consumers and entrepreneurs, and that a level playing field should make federal policy predictable. This playing field should also encourage investment in the edge and the core of the networks that make the internet. Now, that sounds all well and good, but Chibert, I'm going to throw to you first. Listening to that and listening to some sort of talking points about what net neutrality is, what does that actually mean to someone who's building a network or trying to protect a network or trying to interconnect a network?
Well, you got to keep in mind that one of your original questions was, really what is the intent? Where is net neutrality going? What is it really doing? All the documents that I've read so far from the FCC and from various other organizations is the FCC seems to be concentrating on only the edge and the core. The reality is the internet is really a cloud. There's lots of different ways of doing it. In a past life, our friend Brandon Ross, his main job in life was to go and optimize how you get from one place to another. So he actually really and truly did create those internet fast lanes. And the way you do it is you go through and you start talking about how you peer with other places and things like that. So while Brandon seems to sit at his chair and do nothing, no, he's really doing an awful lot of things by optimizing the paths between most used resources. So there's a lot of things that can be done. And what I'd love to see it happen is more of a, okay, we don't want you to go and purposely punish someone for not paying you, but it would be great if you could pay for some network optimization and get those fast lanes built. I think that is more of a neutral attitude than the being able to turn the spigot on and off based upon whether you're paid enough or not.
Right, right. Curtis, I'm going to put you on the spot here. And I'm going to ask, related to what Chibert was talking about with, you know, how we define net neutrality, how we optimize networks. Do you think the net was ever really neutral?
Neutral is an interesting term because it assumes that every body and every piece of traffic is treated the same. And it's tough to say that was true across every single node and connection of the internet. I think what we had was a situation where it was technicians and engineers making some of the decisions about how some of the traffic shaping was going on. And this gets back in some ways to that discussion we were just having about the physician getting access to the network admin passwords. We trust network administrators, we trust engineers and architects to do what's best for the network. It's when the politicians, the marketing people, the sales people, those whose interest is not primarily technological, when they get involved, we tend to begin having trouble with their motivations. And I think that's where we are right now. At the moment, we're looking at every decision, at every proposal, and wondering who's getting paid. And that's a tough mindset from which to try and decide what might be best for the internet as a whole.
Now, gentlemen, when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the regulations as they are. We're actually going to look at some of the specific platform items that the FCC has, again, to give them their due, because we want to have a fully informed ability to make a decision about whether or not these rules are actually supposed to do what we think they're supposed to do. But before we do that, I thought we should take another chance to thank the third sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's LegalZoom. Now, modern technology is great. Smartphones, iPads, and other gadgets make it easy for us to do so many things at the same time. But with all these services around us, the question has to be, why is it so difficult to do some things? Why does it always seem that legal problems specifically take a lot longer to solve? Well, maybe it's because even though we're surrounded by tech and besieged by services, too much of it demands that we work around it, rather than it conforming to the way that we want to do business. That's exactly the problem that LegalZoom is trying to solve. They get it. That's why when it comes to getting the legal help you need, LegalZoom provides a great solution that works with your busy schedule. Now, let's face it, the legal system is complicated. There are better things that you can do with your time. Thankfully, LegalZoom is there for you. So if you're thinking about starting a business, forming an LLC, or getting a trademark, will, or living trust, LegalZoom gets the job done right. You get the personal attention that you need, and they'll take care of all the details. LegalZoom provides legal help through independent attorneys and self-help services, but it's not a law firm. LegalZoom has been helping families and small business owners for 14 years, and they received an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. So here's what we'd like you to do. We want you to try LegalZoom.com and see if maybe they might be your solution to your legal problems. Visit LegalZoom.com and use the offer code ENTERPRISE to save on your legal needs and also to get access to a network of legal plan attorneys for guidance. Don't put off the things that you need to do. Go to LegalZoom.com right now and use the offer code ENTERPRISE. That's LegalZoom.com, offer code ENTERPRISE to receive $10 off at checkout. And we thank LegalZoom for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get back to it. Evan, I want to bring you back into this. The FCC is specifically calling for comments on 6 areas. The first is how do they create an enforceable rule of the internet? And I think this is huge. They want to restore the open internet rules from the FCC versus Verizon suit that took place back in January, but they also want to have some sort of authority. They want to actually be able to do something if someone starts violating those guidelines. The second part was that they wanted to protect choice for consumers and opportunity for innovators. The key there is that the standard must be able to keep pace with the process of innovation. The third part was that they wanted practices to stop that could prevent or hurt the open internet. They specifically asked if prioritization affected the open internet. The fourth part was to expand transparency, and in that part, the takeaway was they wanted ISPs to disclose their network practices. The fifth part was that they wanted to protect consumers, innovators, and startups, including creating an ombudsman with the authority to intervene on behalf of the smaller guys. And the last part was addressing the digital divide, which considered mobile use and the deployment of high-speed broadband into rural areas. On its face, what they're asking for comment on, this doesn't seem like the evil internet smashing plan that everyone is calling it. So again, there seems to be a disconnect. How do you connect those two? How is this plan that I see before me seen as such a threat to the internet?
Well, I'm not so sure I understand why so many people see it as a threat to the internet either. Certainly we know more about it now than we did a couple of weeks ago. So there is more surface area, if you will, to throw stones at. But this still is an open and living document that is open for discussion. That's its very purpose. And one of the, certainly one of the key provisions or the key ideas or concepts that's embodied in it is the idea of blocking content, the prohibition on blocking certain content. That's the terminology that's actually used in the rule, with the ability for providers, for enterprises to negotiate the presence of a fast lane, if you will. Now, the idea of a fast lane is not mentioned in the text of the rules itself. The FCC itself doesn't even come up, doesn't even use that term anywhere, but it talks about priority services or prioritized services as well. So if you actually look at what it says, it's sort of there's sort of two different parts in the rules moving here. There's this no blocking prohibition, which means that you can't diminish the availability of the content down to a level where it's not effective for the user. And then there's also this idea of you can set up these internet fast lanes so long as it's not commercially unreasonable. The rules themselves don't say anything that alludes to the fast lane or the ability to establish that. Like, for example, you can't go to the text of the rules and say, here's where it says it's okay to establish a fast lane. What we see is the rules expressing it in the negative is that you just can't do something. There's no blocking under any circumstances, even if it's a negotiated arrangement, which means that a broadband provider couldn't negotiate an agreement with a content provider to say you won't let anything at all through this other party come through the last mile at all. That would never be permissible under any set of circumstances, even if it was a negotiated agreement and everybody was on board.
Okay, wait, hold on.
Because
so,
there's no blocking.
I want to break in really quickly here, because that is actually, I think, one of the key things that is pissing people off. We understand the language. So the FCC is saying, look, trust us. We want to get this agreement in because even though we're going to give the ISPs what they want, the ability to charge for prioritized traffic, we are telling them that in no way, shape, or form will they be allowed to block traffic. And they think that that has some sort of force because they said it. I think where network engineers start to go crazy, and Chibert, I'm going to throw this over to you, is there seems to be such a huge FCC fail in thinking that prioritized traffic is not the same as blocking traffic. And Chibert, we both know, being network administrators, that if you're going to prioritize some forms of traffic, you will, by definition, since you have a finite amount of bandwidth, degrade other traffic. I mean, is that the thing? Is that the disconnect? Is that the thing that the FCC doesn't seem to understand?
Well, the FCC has something similar already in place for cell mobile traffic. It's basically certain EIN numbers are, for mobile devices for first responders, for emergency personnel, and so forth, no matter what, they're always going to get a channel. Well, if you flip that around, that means if the cell towers are full, that means someone's going to get dropped. So what the FCC is trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, there are going to be times when this is going to be acceptable. I personally think what I just don't want to start happening is, for people to start for us to create a environment where you have brokers. The brokers where we start getting, a repeat of Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall, where, people go and take money under the table and say, oh, we'll exert our influence for you. That is what I hope the FCC is trying to avoid. Yes, they understand that, sometimes it is a limited amount of resources, and if you do give priority to one, you might drop the other. But it's also the FCC has also made some statements that the internet is inherently a best effort utility, and that's one of the reasons why there's been a lot of people saying no, it should not be lumped in with the carriers. It should not be, like telcos. It is a best effort, and that's what a lot of people keep forgetting. It is not 5 nines of reliability.
I want to throw to you next, Curtis, because there is something we can go into a previous discussion that we had on Twiat about peering, because one of the things that I think is a cause for this FCC fail of disconnect is that even if ISPs are willing to upgrade their networks in order to, as Evan stated, guarantee that there's no slowing of traffic within their own networks, the problem are the interconnects, the peering interconnects, the parts where the networks overlap and exchange traffic with one another. Even before this net neutrality debacle, some major top-tier providers were playing loose and fast with their equipment that connected to other networks, which essentially meant that things ran really fast on their network, or anyone that was paying them money to upgrade their own equipment, it ran really slow for anybody else. This seems to be one of the things that the FCC is not accounting for in their net neutrality plan. And again, I think it's one of the things that as people study it, they're going to see that this is what needs comment. If the FCC wants to give ISPs the power to charge more for prioritized traffic, they also have to have some sort of guidelines that guarantee that that those ISPs will upgrade those peering interconnects to make traffic more easy to flow between them. Now, Curtis, we talked about peering previously on Twiat. We talked about how there's really 3 levels of peering. There's transit, there's peer, and there's customer. And in transit, the operator of one network pays the operator of another network for the right to transmit on his network. In peer, you have 2 different network operators that agree to exchange traffic freely for mutual benefit. And, in other words, I can get to your customers, you can get to my customers. And then there's the customer. There's us, someone who just pays in order to access the overall network. What I want to know from you is when you start to look at the enterprise and when you look at the number of companies that fall into those 3 tiers, either a customer, a peer, or a transit a customer, do they understand how their networks will be affected if this agreement goes in without some sort of regulation about that peering?
I tend to think that those who are up at the transit level absolutely do. Those who are on the peer level probably do, or at least have a lot of people working for them who do. It's all the people down at the customer side who are trying to figure out what this means for them. And, as you've been saying, and Chibert said, it's absolutely true. We know that you cannot prioritize one type of traffic without, by default, deprioritizing some other form or forms of traffic. That's just the way it works. And I think what we're going to get into a problem with here, and really the nastiness inside this Pandora's box that the combination of the FCC and the courts have opened, is this. You mentioned the kinds of technological issues that have to be addressed. And that's true. The problem is if the FCC were to write those technological fixes into this to somehow come in and cleave the Gordian knot and figure out how to prevent people from handicapping any traffic. Could they do it without, as a side effect, hobbling future innovation by declaring that certain types of connections, certain types of technology, certain types of traffic were mandated for the internet? And I think we all know enough to know that we don't want to mandate any particular technology, because by definition almost, the technology is changing so rapidly. It's a nasty situation they're in. And again, I think that if we had seen something coming out of the FCC that was the result of a technological study group, a bunch of engineers and network architects who got together in a room and came together and said, here's what we think should work best, we would feel one way. As it is, we have the firm feeling that the politicians and certain of the big corporations are in charge of the process, and none of us are comfortable with that. It's going to be unpleasant and ugly, really now, regardless of whether what comes out of the process is ultimately good for the internet and its users or bad. And that's really the worst of all situations to be in.
Evan, let me go over to you, because I think we need legal advice from our legal guru here. When it comes down to it, it seems to me what the FCC wants is they want the ability to use an authority over something to make the ISPs accountable, the broadband providers accountable. In other words, they're saying, look, we're going to have to give away something in order to get enough authority so that we can stop the truly bad things from happening. Do you think that with the proposed FCC guidelines that would set up a panel which could decide whether or not broadband providers were operating in a commercially reasonable way, that they would then be able to use that authority to go and say, look, commercially reasonable means you have to upgrade your peering points. It means that you have to be technologically savvy enough to know when you're actually hurting customer throughput? Or do you think the FCC, as some people in the chat room are saying, is just concentrating on the fact that there's a lot of video zooming around the internet and they just want to protect that?
I don't know about the second one. I'd have to stop and think about that. And by the way, since Curtis said we're in the worst of all possible situations, I quickly took a Prozac, so I'm feeling better. So maybe that's going to animate, my comments here.
Did you bring enough for the rest of the class?
I'll send it through Skype. It'll take it, right? Okay, so feel better. If it I don't think the FCC needs to talk to people at the peering level and the transit level, because the way that these rules are written focuses on the use of the edge providers and the end users. Both ends of the content delivery pathway, if you will. And so whatever has to be done to ensure that use is effective, that's the word that's actually in the rules. It'll do you some good to actually read the rules. It's good for your soul, better than Prozac. As long as it's effective, there's no problem. And so a certain way of looking at it is that these proposed rules set a floor under which the service cannot go and the quality of the service cannot go for the edge provider and the end user. It can't get any worse than this under any set of circumstances, regardless of what kind of contracts have been entered into, what have you, because that would be commercially unreasonable. Then there's the ability, which isn't expressly in the rules themselves, to enter into these prioritized arrangements. So I see that as no ceiling. You can enter into these special arrangements so that you get this prioritized service that's good and it's fast, and you pay more for it, just like you get premium services in any other industry. If I want to fly first class, well, I better expect to pay a few $100s more per ticket. Nobody objects about that. So there's the unended it's a limitless potential as far as the prioritized services that one could get, but there is a basement level. And sure, it's not been well defined yet, but we're working through this as a society, as a culture, through this crowdsourced sort of rulemaking process to establish means define where that bottom is. And so this seems to solve the problem that you've brought up, Padre, and I think it's really good, and it's a legitimate problem, and here's how I think it is. I think it's a non-problem at the end of the day. This technical problem, and I take everybody's word for it because you all have a better technical understanding than I do it. If you're going to give priority service to one, you necessarily have to diminish another one. Okay, fine. So what? Suppose I have 25 download speeds, but I only need 10 to effectively use the service to watch movies on Netflix or what have you. If that's brought down from 25 to 10, I don't care. I don't notice. It's not going to kill the next Facebook if there's a little bit of traffic taken, that's allocated to me, so that somebody who's paying more has prioritized service. But if, for the benefit of that prioritized service, it takes me to download speeds of 8, and I can't watch Netflix anymore, then that's a problem. And that would be blocking, and it would be illegal. It would be illegal under these regulations because it has taken the service to me down to a level of access that is not sufficiently robust, fast, and dynamic for effective use by me,
but Evans,
the end user.
It seems as if that floor is so arbitrary. Since they don't understand the technology behind it, they can't set a floor. They don't understand what that floor is. And what I'm saying, the reason why the peering points are really important in this debate and why it's noticeably absent from the FCC regulations is because networks, most of the broadband providers' networks are more than fast enough for their edge customers. As you said, the difference between 10 megabits and 25 megabits down is not that much. But we actually do know that there's a history of the top-tier broadband providers crippling the peering points in order to extract more money, and there's nothing illegal about it. And even if we were going to adopt the FCC regulations, unless they specifically said that the service that you offer must be across the internet, which you couldn't do because you can't control all the ISPs, then that floor is useless. In other words, I could say, look, I'm Verizon. My Verizon customers can enjoy 100 megabits all around us. Now, of course, if they try to access anything that's connected to level 3, which includes Netflix, they won't get that. But that's just because level 3 hasn't upgraded their facilities. And that sounds far-fetched, but we've actually seen it. Jason, if you could, let's talk a little bit about level 3, because level 3 has a great article about the difficulties of interconnecting with ISPs. Now, they mapped out all the fiber runs that they currently own, which accounts to about 180,000 miles of fiber around the world. Then they mapped out the data centers into which that fiber terminates to serve its customers. Now, currently, they have more than 10,000 customers with Ethernet connections. They originally invested about $40 billion in this network. They currently provide access to about 46,000 networks that peer with level 3 for fiber and bandwidth. However, it really only has 51 peers. That's top-tier peers. These peers are located in 45 cities. They're connected through 1,360 10 gigabit per second Ethernet ports, and each peer has between 1 and 20 interconnection ports. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The average interconnection link utilization is about 36%. That's the threshold at which they start to say you should probably look at upgrading your links so that you can keep that utilization down. Once it gets above 90%, you start to see delay and packet loss. That's that floor that you're talking about. Now, at that utilization, you get drop packets for several hours a day. And what they found over the course of their study was that of their peers, of their 51 peers, 12 of them are congested at or above 90%. 6 of those 12 are currently in the process of making upgrades, but the remaining 6 are chronologically congested. Jason, I believe you have that picture from the TriCaster in folder 92, episode 92. Those peers are making absolutely no effort to upgrade their system to decrease that congestion. What you can see here at the top is what a regular utilization looks like. You see these little peaks. The peaks never flatten out as you see at the bottom. When it flattens out, it means that the links are oversubscribed and you're dropping packets, you're getting errors, you're by necessity going to be slowing down people. Unless the FCC has some sort of language that says that bottom graph, which is acceptable via network terms but would be unacceptable via the FCC regulations, is illegal, then I don't see how they how they legislate. Cheever, let me throw this over to you first, because you've got experience with peering. We know for a fact, we can't name anyone because we'd get in trouble, that some of these providers are deliberately keeping their links at 90% in order to get more money out of their peer partners, right?
Yeah. Actually, this is something that I'd love to have Interop One in the chat room chime in on, because he's actually got a lot of experience with this, and I'm not really that experienced. I'm usually the person buying the link and saying, you know, go make it happen. I don't care how you make it happen, just make it happen, make it appear on my premise.
Got it. Got it. Oh, Curtis, let me throw this over to you really quickly, because this is actually something that we've covered on Twite before. It's a touchy subject because it's this idea that all the broadband access I buy can be crippled by a fight between Level 3 and Verizon or Level 3 and Comcast. This happens all the time, right? I mean, this is the thing that I think engineers get really, really upset about, because the FCC seems to believe that the internet is just a big flat network and that the providers just sell access to that network.
Oh, absolutely. It does happen. And generally when it happens, somebody, you know, they stare at their computer and go, darned internet, it's slow. Somebody must be downloading, you know, the entire Lord of the Rings director's cut, and it's screwing me over. The fact is, this possibility is why the very largest customers and even some mid-sized enterprises have what are known as SLAs, service level agreements, with all kinds of providers that say, you will deliver to me this level of service, usually defined in terms of response times or throughput, or you owe me money back as a penalty. Those customers, oddly enough, tend to be much less affected than the run-of-the-mill customer by these things. It will be interesting to see how much that hits us moving forward. And the thing is, as you say, it has been hitting people. You know, we've hit the point already. I've seen statistics that say somewhere approaching 90% of all internet traffic is video already. Doesn't mean that 90% of all customers are doing video, just that those content types tend to have a lot of bits associated with them. We're seeing impacts, and it's not an easy set of problems for either the carrier industry or the FCC to try and solve. I wish everyone the best of luck. I just wish I felt more kindly disposed towards the efforts that are going on right now.
I like that.
One thing that's important to sort of tack on to your comments there, Curtis, is that you know, to a certain extent, the open internet rules are not even going to touch some of the things I believe that you were talking about, Curtis, because the regulations, and this is the same as it was under the 2010 open internet rule, open internet order. These only touch broadband internet service, which is more precisely defined as mass market retail services to homes and to small businesses. So large, sophisticated B2B transactions aren't within the scope of these regulations, that never have been and would not be as they are now. So for large, sophisticated entities who have the wherewithal to negotiate service level agreements and other provisions into that arrangement, these, you know, what the FCC is doing here wouldn't touch those. So I think it's just important to sort of tack that on to what extent it's relevant.
And Evan, I want to say thank you for that. You're absolutely right. And paradoxically, I think that means that the people who will see the greatest impact from this are the people with, individually at least, the least strong negotiating position and the least amount of technological knowledge to try and understand what all this means. Not the first time this has happened, but certainly a case where those who know the least will see the most impact.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so very much for this discussion. It's nice to be able to talk about an issue that's going to affect all of us without breaking out into a lot of swearing and a lot of cursing. I do want to end this with one little blurb. It's a post from Comcast Corporate about Netflix, about debunking Level 3's claims. They responded in their post, which was an answer to a complaint that Comcast was throttling Netflix, by saying, first, Our customers get access to all the online video they want, along with any other internet content, application, or service they choose, regardless of its source. 2, any rumors about blocking Netflix are false. 3, our customers can and do watch video from any online video provider, including Netflix and dozens of others, on our high-speed internet service without blocking. And 4, regardless of how this dispute with Level 3 turns out, that will always continue to be the case. I only bring that up because that's actually from 4 years ago, when one of the net neutrality disputes between Level 3 and Comcast first came up. They said back then that they never saw in the foreseeable future of Comcast doing any sort of blocking to hurt their consumers. And 4 years later, the battle continues. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for this conversation. I want to thank each and every single one of you for being part of this panel. Cheever, let's start with you. I'm sorry for bumping. I know, I just realized I bumped into one of your NDAs. And you can smile and just smile, and we'll just assume what you should be saying. But if you want to tell the folks at home where they can find you, please do so.
I am still publishing on Internet Week and having a whole bunch of fun. Just got a chance to play with the new Synology NAS, actually Synology IO Safe NAS, and I also got to play with some new Raritan IPKVMs. Both a lot of fun. Both will be appearing shortly on Internet Week.
Woot, woot, and woot. And what
Why did I say Internet Week? InfoWorld.
InfoWorld, yeah.
I just went into a time warp.
It's a TARDIS. It's the TARDIS that does that, the time streams. What about you, Curtis? I understand your world has changed a little bit. Do you want to tell us about it?
My world has changed and is changing for a variety of reasons. Enterprise efficiency, which I have called my writing and radio home for the last 4 years, is not going to be that any longer. I am transitioning over to Information Week right now. And in terms of that, we have a great radio show tomorrow. That's Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, where Information Week is going to be debuting the results of their latest IT salary survey. Now, if you're employed in the industry, want to know how you're doing, what salaries are doing, this would be a great radio episode to come by and catch the show and the chat. And just on a personal level, I would love to see you there. Go over to informationweek.com, look down on the right side, you'll see audio interviews. The one tomorrow at 2 o'clock is the one I'm talking about. Hope to see you there.
Thank you. Thank you, Curtis. Always great to have you both on. And Evan Brown, every time you come on, you raise the quality of discussion, and I love you for that. Thank you so very much for spending a Monday with us. If you could tell the folks where they could find you.
Sure thing, Padre. As always, a great pleasure being on the show. Thank you so much. Right back at you on as far as the quality goes. Sure do appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I write a blog over at internetcases.com that I try to keep track, somewhat with things going on, new developments with law and technology, interesting stories with, things coming out of the courts with the internet and new media and software, things like that. On Twitter, I am at Internet Cases. Also, check out my law firm website. It's infolawgroup.com. My law firm is Info Law Group. Every Friday with Denise Howell, I co-host here on the Twit Network This Week in Law. That's at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern every Friday at live.twit.tv, and also other places, other means of distribution for that content. So and it's great to check in with you here once in a while, Padre, on Twit, and always enjoy our conversation. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Evan. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you. I also want to thank our audience. That's right, you, the man, the woman, the geek, the gal, the person who downloads our show each and every single week to stay apprised as to the goings on in the enterprise world. You're the folks that make this all possible, so we want to do something for you. We want to give you an easier way to get this content into your device of choice. If you drop by our show page at twit.tv/Twiet, you'll find a drop-down menu that will give you all the different options for getting This Week in Enterprise Tech automatically into your iPhone, your iPad, your Android phone or tablet, your Mac, your PC, your desktop, your laptop, whatever device you may want. Well, we're going to give it to you because, we love you. Also, why not follow me on Twitter? You can find me at twitter.com/PadreSJ. There you'll be able to find out what I'm doing week to week in every episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, as well as follow the Digital Jesuit as he roams through the world checking out Geekitude. Yeah, that's exactly what I do. Also, why not drop by and see us live every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time at live.twit.tv. There you'll be able to see the pre-show, the post-show, and any of the bloopers that get edited out at the end, as well as join our fantastic, tremendous, incredibly intelligent chat room at irc.twit.tv. I'm going to have my little Miss Nancy moment and say, I see you, Morbius. I see you, Cheebird. I see you, Robert Bigelow. I see you, Richard Ja. And we thank you for being part of the Twiat Riot. Also, I want to thank everyone here who has made this show possible. Lisa, Leo, my super producer, Carson, and of course, my TD Jason, who has some very, very important, very special news that you all need to hear.
Are you talking about All About Android?
Yeah, that thing. You know.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, that's big news. It's tomorrow again, Tuesdays, again at 5 p.m. Pacific, live.twit.tv. I'm also working on another Android show, which I guess that's kind of news as well, but news is forthcoming on that one. So,
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Fantastic. Now, next week we're going to be, next week we're off for the Memorial Day weekend, but the week after we're going to be coming back with Dan Holm from IT Unity talking all about cloud-based stuff. Yeah, stay tuned. Another Twiat. I'm Father Robert Ballister reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep Twiat.